Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley. I'm your host, Carrie, along with a co-host founder of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. Our Canal Days series explores historic sites throughout Massachusetts, with Robert's expertise of the state's history as our personal guide. Each episode we discover a new location with its hidden history within. So today's episode will be exploring some of the burials of Catholic pastors throughout Western Mass. So, where are such burials? For instance, in Holyoke, Massachusetts.
Okay, there used to be three churchyard burials of Catholic pastors in Holyoke. Now there's only one left. The first one is still there, Jeremiah O'Callahan. He's, as you look in towards the St. Jerome's Church, he's off to the right-hand side, buried with a large obelisk-shaped gravestone. He was the founder of the St. Jerome's Parish and his first pastor, and the other two are now gone. So there used to be also be one along the steps of the Holy Rosary Church in Holyoke. When they took down that church in the year 1974, they also moved the gravestone for that pastor into the Calvary Cemetery of Holyoke. And so that's one of the moved ones. There also was one for Andre Dufresne, the founder and the first pastor of the Precious Blood Church in Holyoke. And he was buried there alongside the left-hand side of the church. His gravestone still exists. It's been moved along with his body in 1989 to the Precious Blood Cemetery in South Hadley, Massachusetts. And you can see his old-time marble gravestone there. He's buried atop the area where victims of the Precious Blood fire are also buried. And so Holyoke had three. It has one left, and at least it has that one, but it has the memory of that too, because they start up pages for these, and I've done that for many communities. It's become a hobby of all the history I do. One of the probably my most favorite thing is to find pastors buried alongside their church. And I do this outside of Western Massachusetts too. There's one in Stafford Springs, Connecticut. I've never gone to, but I've gone to two others outside the area. One in New Bedford, near the St. Anthony's Church. One in Laconia, New Hampshire. And there's one in Worcester, and there's several around the Boston area.
And can you tell us of some of the burials that are located in Chicopee?
In Chicopee, you have a churchyard that has gravestones inside of it. These are for the pastors of Chicopee that served the holy name of Jesus Church. And the pastors there, one is buried near the front steps of the church, maybe about 30 feet out. The other one, and the church is still there, the other one was buried between the school and the church because he was the founder of the school itself. Now, neither is the first pastor. They were the fourth and fifth pastors. Neither of them are the founder of the church. One of them was the founder of the school, and that's why he is buried quite near the church, too. So they've done it in such a way to make sure that they're doing honor to these two men, and they place them differently, which is very unusual, because usually when you find multiple burials at a churchyard, they're right together. But here in Chicopee, they put them at different locations. Now, the first one is the fourth pastor of Holy Name. His name is Patrick Healy, and he has a beautiful joint gravestone in burial sarcophagus. And he was a third pastor, actually, of this Holy Name. And why weren't the pastors number 1 and 2 buried here? Well, they were buried in other locations, and they had left being pastor here while still alive and went further away like eastern Massachusetts or to Connecticut. And that's why you don't find them here. The other one was Henry Robinson, and he loved very much the tutelage that Patrick Healy had given him in life. Early life, he had encouraged him to be a pastor, and he became the head pastor of the Holy Name Church too. And so he also is buried in the churchyard with his friend Patrick Healy. So that is Chicopee, and they're both there, but the church is no longer used, even though it's still there.
And quickly, before we continue with the rest of our interview, to find out more about his tours and sign up for any private tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And you can also find the rest of our series or our podcast and also our video series, Canal Days, as well. So be sure to go and check them out. And getting back to our interview, can you reveal some of the burials of the Catholic pastors within Springfield?
Yes. The St. Michael's Church was not a cathedral. When it was built in 1861, at first it was a church for 9 years until 1870s, when then it became a cathedral. There are two pastors of the church phase from 1860 to 1870, and before it was even a church, it was a parish on its own without a physical building. The first priest was Michael Gallagher. He served St. Michael's from 1856 to 1869, and he's buried on the front steps of St. Michael's Cathedral. The next pastor, Thomas O'Sullivan, died a year later, and he's also buried on the other side of these set of steps. So they're very close together, maybe about 25 feet apart. And also in Springfield, you have some more going on, because in the chapel, underneath the front altar of that church, you have a special crypt where the first three bishops of the Springfield diocese are buried. This location has a special name. It's called the St. Augustine Mortuary Chapel. It's below, again, that head altar. And in there, they have a location where they buried the first three bishops. And I'll tell you their names. And then when they served as bishop, Patrick O'Reilly, the first bishop of the Catholic Diocese. He also was the bishop of Worcester County, but when that broke off to be another diocese, he was the bishop for the 4 western Massachusetts counties. He served from 1870 to 1892, and he was the first one buried in the St. Augustine Mortuary Chapel below the altar of St. Michael's. Thomas Bevan came next. He served a very long time, from 1892 to 1920, and when he died in 1920, he was buried in the St. Augustine Mortuary Chapel as the second burial of the second bishop. The next bishop along, Thomas O'Leary, served from 1920 to 1949, 28 plus years, and when he died in 1949, they buried him in the St. Augustine Mortuary Chapel also. So there's 3 Catholic bishops buried in the same location. Then all the rest of the bishops after that are not buried in that mortuary chapel, but there's one more burial alongside a churchyard within Springfield. And that's at the Sacred Heart Churchyard. There, along its left-hand side, the founder and the first pastor of the Sacred Heart Church is buried. He started as pastor of this church and made the church rise up with a school, a convent, and a rectory. He served from 1874 until his death in France in 1891. And he's buried also alongside his church. So Springfield has 6 pastors buried outside of cemeteries.
And are there any other communities in Massachusetts that have significant burials that we have yet to explore?
Okay, there's one in Northampton, and that's the only one I'm going to mention outside of the 4 communities I'm going to mention today. I told you about the one in Laconia, Stafford Springs, New Bedford, Worcester, and Boston, but there happens to be one in Northampton, and that's Patrick Callery, buried outside his church that he found, and he was the first pastor at. He was served at the St. Mary's of the Assumption, and that's in the Florence neighborhood or village of Northampton, and you find his gravestone right outside. About 25 years ago, I was riding my bike through Northampton, and I happened by accident to find his gravestone there. He was the first pastor I ever found outside of the churchyard, still buried in place. That is the start of my hobby, trying to find as many as I can. Since then, I probably found or visited about maybe I think 16 or 17 total. And I'm mentioning the ones in Western Massachusetts today.
And then also, is there any in East Hampton that you may have not talked about yet?
There used to be one, but it's been moved into a cemetery. So we saved this one for last because it's gone. At least Holyoke, which had 3, at least has 1 left. But sadly, East Hampton, which had only 1, that one was moved. That was the one outside of the Immaculate Conception Church, now called as a parish Our Lady of the Valley. Its founder and first pastor was buried outside the front of the church. I don't know if he was buried to the left or right. I've looked at many old maps and I've read stories about this situation, but I cannot find which side he was buried on. But he was there, and I know he was there because I found his obituary, and then I found his funeral notice a few days later, and it talks about where he's buried. And probably sometime soon after he died, they built up a new church. The first church was a wooden clad church. Then a brick and mortar church, which burned to the ground a week later. And then they built a larger brick and mortar church, which is still there. Now, Jeremiah Toomey is the founder and first pastor. He died in 1873 and was buried right outside the church. Nowadays, he's in the priest circle number 1 of the St. Bridget's Cemetery of East Hampton. They moved his body. Now, whether they moved it when they constructed the second church or the third church, which were built a year apart, I don't know. But they moved it probably in the year during the construction of those 2 churches, so probably in the late 1880s. So he only stayed in place about 15 years, and then they moved his burial, and he's got a very simple stone inside the priest circle. So I love having this hobby, and that's why I like talking about it a lot.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And check out a large selection of our other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. Be sure to stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And thank you for joining us.